Ainda não, porque faltam 5
Sim.
minutos.
Sim, ainda faltam 5 minutos. Eu vou colocar a reunião ativa no YouTube também, para que as
Mandar um
pessoas
WhatsApp para a Carolina.
O evento é em inglês?
Como, André?
Sim.
O evento é em inglês ou em português? Porque está todo mundo
Sim.
falando português aqui, eu estou bem à vontade.
Excelente, excelente. Não será em inglês porque é uma conferência internacional
Ok.
e o inglês ainda goza dessa reputação.
Tá joia.
Larissa, a Ana está consigo?
Como?
Não, a Ana não está comigo, ela está em Vigo.
Ela está aí vivo? Ok. Ok. Ok.
Conseguem me ouvir?
Sim, sim.
Carolina.
Nós já estamos ao vivo pelo YouTube também da Casa Comum, que foi o mesmo link que a Ana deve ter enviado para vocês. Mas eu não estou com ela, André, ela está em Vigo.
Ok.
Bem-vinda, Carolina.
Como é que eu encontro... Oh, Carolina, Larissa, como é que eu vejo aqui esta live no YouTube?
Bom dia,
Eu
tudo
vou
bem?
enviar aqui para
Desculpe.
vocês pelo chat uma mensagem.
I think that we better switch to English now, just in case we make a mistake, right? The presentation has to be in English, okay? So I think that from now onwards, we should be speaking in English amongst ourselves.
Ok.
Sounds good.
Good afternoon, Carolina.
Good afternoon, Andrea. How are you? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. What a wonderful place you're at.
Yeah, my background. I'm always in the library.
All
This is
right.
a library of Harvard, in the Harvard Yard. Is the main library here. So it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. Okay. So, do you think do you have any issue you'd like to address before we start? No, not exactly. No,
No?
No, yes.
you're okay. We're missing someone.
Welcome, Isabella. No, from the first team, no, we are all on.
Hi.
Livia, welcome.
Hi, nice to meet you, everybody. We are from
Hello.
it's the first and second. I'm sorry, I don't remember if we're the first or the second team.
Good afternoon, Isabella.
Good afternoon.
How are you today?
Hello, everyone.
We're doing great. Thank you very
Hello,
much.
Deborah.
Wonderful.
Meu
Okay.
hit.
Larissa, I think it's 2 p.m. already. I think we should start,
Yeah,
right?
you can start. Yeah, you can start now.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. Just hang on a minute. All right.
Okay, are you the one who starts, right?
I'm sorry?
Are you the one who starts first?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Hello, good afternoon to all. Welcome to the International Conference of What If? World History, hosted by the Universidade do Vigo, with the Instituto de Justiça e Género, and with the support of Casa Comum, Reitoria da Universidade do Porto, and Invicta Imaginaria. Okay, these sessions and debates about alternative history. My name is André Coelho. I'm the chair of the following oral presentations about what if women were the majority gender at the Brazilian executive power strategic positions. And on the other, as a second paper, Solar Storms and Social Unrest, year 2013, an investigation into cosmic influences on social movement. Okay, the first one, we have a collective panel of Brazilian investigators, primarily presented by Dr. Isabella Bloom. Good afternoon, Isabella.
Good afternoon.
Okay, and the second panel, we have Dr. Fernando Nascimento, Dr. Carolina, and Dr. Alfredo Barens. It's another Brazilian collective. So, okay, but before we start, I'd just like to say that these papers that will be outlined today are going to be published at the Hypothesis Historia periodical journal, that on previous occasions have guests editors like Dr. Irene Pimentel and the awarded Prêmio Pessoa in 2007, Dr. Nelson Zagallo from Universidade de Aveiro, and has united some rich versatility of papers as Women and Men in Technology, an Alternative Historic Proposal for Equals, What If We Can Be Heroes for More Than One Day, What If Maria Graham Did Not Travel to Brazil in 1821, or what if at the Monty Python Flying Circus series would have the idea of continuity prevailing throughout the episodes. So as we can confirm, alternative history is indeed the true topic of today's investigators regarding the enormous variety of very fine papers received, each one of them raising new questions and bringing new possibilities and new possible futures as a way to better understand the past and to prepare the present towards better tomorrows. The links for this journal will be left here at the present broadcast. And okay, done with presentation. Let's begin with this debate, starting with the first paper introduced. What if women were the majority gender at the Brazilian executive power strategic positions? Dr. Isabella, I think we are happy to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Andrea, actually,
I'm gonna pass to Emily, right? Emily will introduce the first part and then I'm gonna catch up.
Yeah, we're both presenting. Okay, so I'll do the first part. Okay, I'll start sharing here the presentation. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
Okay.
Can you see the screen? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So, my name is Emily Rossetti. I'm a Latin white woman. I have short brown hair, straight hair, brown eyes, and I'm wearing a flowery t-shirt. And together with my colleague Isabella Bloom, we're going to present a proposition. What if Brazil were led by women from 2020 to 2022 during the COVID-19 pandemic? So our colleagues, Débora Furloni, Lívia Evangelista, Maria Raquel Stacciarini, and Sara Mota are also part of the team behind this work. We're all members of LaboraGov, the innovation lab from the Ministry of Public Management and Innovation in the Brazilian federal government. So this is a story of how Brazil faced the COVID-19 pandemic. It began in 2020 with the sudden outbreak of a disease caused by a new unknown virus. People around the world were dying. Governments had to take action. Nations needed leaders who were resilient, trustworthy, effective, and guided by evidence to implement strong policies and protect populations. At that time, Brazil was led by Ana Maria Dantas, serving her second term as president. She had extensive experience working with municipalities and a deep understanding of SUS, Brazil's national public health system. As former president of the National Council of Municipal Health Departments, she had taken part in the National Forum that brings together all three levels of government responsible for managing Brazil's unified health system, the federal, the state, and the municipal level.
Emily,
This is Brazil's main space for public health governance, and that is why she understood that effective COVID-19 control required leadership based on scientific evidence. Sorry? Oh,
we cannot
sorry.
see your
Yeah.
presentation. I'm sorry.
You can.
We cannot.
Yeah, something
André,
happened
Alfredo, can you see the presentation?
Oh, something happened here.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, you can?
We cannot.
Sorry, okay. Again, I'll try again. Yeah,
No, it's okay. Thank you.
No, it's good.
good. Should I start again or? I'll go from here. Yeah.
Perhaps it would be better. Thank you.
Oh, okay, what? Go from here or start again? What would be better?
I think we can enjoy better if you start again.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Oops, sorry. So this is this is where I talked about the outbreak of COVID-19. Yes, that was a new pandemic that started in 2020, and people were dying. And nations needed leaders who were resilient, trustworthy, effective, and guided by evidence to implement strong policies and protect the population. And this is Ana Maria Dantas, our former president. Yes, at that time, she led Brazil, serving her second term as president. She had extensive experience working with municipalities and deep understanding of SUS, which is Brazil's national public health system. She was a former president of the National Council of Municipal Health Department before becoming president. So she had taken part in the national forum that brings together the three levels of government responsible for managing Brazil's unified health system: the federal, the state, and the municipal level. This is Brazil's main space for public health governance. That's why she understood that the effective COVID-19 control required leadership based on scientific evidence, community participation, and cross-sector coordination, always considering the social determinants of health. It was not an easy time. At that moment, 52% of leadership positions in the federal government were held by women. And to face the crisis, the president and her team played a crucial role by acting quickly and decisively, creating the Central Epidemic Command Center that brought experts together, experts in healthcare, infectious diseases, economics, anthropology, and other key fields. And this move prioritized science-based policies and empowered health authorities. Also, they adopted transparent, calm, and consistent communication with daily press briefings and public health campaigns to build public trust and compliance and to fight misinformation. And they implemented rapid border control and quarantine policies and invested in local mask production and distributed them through the national health system, ensuring that everybody had access to masks. The first case of COVID-19 in Brazil was confirmed on February 26th of 2020. Knowing what was happening abroad and the severity of the disease, a national lockdown was declared on March 1st, with only 102 cases and no deaths. By June, the community transmission had been virtually eliminated. President Dantas gave clear data-based briefings. She explained scientific concepts in simple terms, so people could understand the information and not be alarmed by terms they could not understand. There was pre-testing, even for asymptomatic people, and strict contact tracing and mandatory quarantines. Government used compassionate communication to create social trust and compliance, using reassuring messages and inclusive language with words like we, us, and together. And they also acknowledged public fear and fatigue, which helped maintain public cooperation. President Dantas launched youth mental health initiatives and held child-friendly press conferences to explain the situation clearly and ease anxiety, especially as children struggled with sudden changes in their routine, like not going to school, for example, or not being able to go out and see friends. The government took action to include diverse groups, such as older adults, youth, and marginalized communities. So they developed special protections for older adults, created remote schooling programs with actual digital access, extended health protections to migrant workers, and enhanced Indigenous peoples' health policy, including guidelines in Indigenous languages. During lockdowns, domestic violence rose as victims were trapped with their abusers. This was worsened by increased stress from health, economic, and social pressures, reduced access to support services and shelters, isolation, limiting victims' ability to seek help. So the government strengthened hotlines and online reporting tools, kept safe shelters open and accessible, trained health workers to identify and support victims in hospitals and clinics, launched awareness campaigns during lockdown, provided financial support to reduce victims' dependence on abusers, and coordinated with police for rapid response to reports. Well, in May 2023, when the World Health Organization declared that the emergency phase of the pandemic was over, Brazil had recorded only 1,500 deaths and around 150,000 confirmed cases. There was no collapse of the health system during the crisis. The pandemic was declared under control by mid-2021, about 6 months after the start of mass vaccination. The early actions to prevent transmission, both among citizens and from abroad, helped preserve the health system and resume economic activity by December 2020. Public trust in the government grew as people saw consistent, truthful communication and effective results. Social cohesion was stronger and vulnerable groups were protected. The government's approach was widely recognized by academics and the media. Research showed that women were better leaders in managing the pandemic, confirming that gender does matter in leadership. These studies gained international media attention, highlighting Ana Maria Dantas' success in leading Brazil through the crisis. Well, this was all a what-if story. However, it's entirely based on real data and actions taken by real women and leaders around the world. These studies and publications that I mentioned before are also real. But Ana Maria Dantas was not our president. And unfortunately, the story we will have to tell is very different. And I'll pass now to Isabella, who will tell you more.
Thank you. Please, Isabella. Hello, Isabella.
Do you want me to pass the slides, Isabella? Oh, okay.
No, can you see now my screen?
Yeah.
Cool. Let me just resume now, and then it should be okay. It was supposed to be already resumed, but it's been a long time I don't work with Zoom, because in the Brazilian government, we work mainly with Microsoft, with Teams, and the dynamic is different. And now I am getting used to Zoom again. But now I could resume. Okay. Yes, now I'm gonna come up with reality that was very different from the alternative story that Emily presented. Even though the story that Emily presented was based in real facts, in effective leadership, what happened in Brazil was very much different in reality, as probably you all here heard about. We had our first case confirmed in February 25th, and soon we became one of the countries with the highest rates of transmission in the whole world. We were in the headlines all over as a very bad case of the outbreak. The central government of Brazil carried diffused information, which often clashed with the orientation of experts, the WHO, and other countries in topics such as lockdowns, as the use of masks, and towards vaccinations. And despite having a very solid and widespread universal healthcare system called SUS, the Brazilian government failed to control the pandemic due to the lack of investments and also due to the lack of ability to produce a rapid and coordinated response, which caused overcrowded hospitals and the death of thousands and thousands of people. This scenario happened in a government that was led by a man and whose ministerial cabinet was composed in almost 91% by men. Also, the high positions in Brazil for decision-making in the executive and the legislative branches of the federal government were also composed majoritarily by men. And here is the results of the management during the COVID pandemic. We don't want to talk much about it. We don't think it is a good memory for any of us Brazilians, but we had situations such as the case of more than 4,000 deaths in 24 hours. We reached more than 500,000 people dead, and we had some states where the healthcare system completely collapsed. This is a comparative graph. We extracted it. It's from BBC News, but they did this graph based on the WHO data. This is a comparative cases of death per 100,000 people. And we see that Brazil is here very, very high in number of cases and in number of deaths. And besides the collapse that we had in the healthcare system and towards health outcomes, there was also a very sharp rise in domestic violence. And in some states of Brazil, this rise was in around 300% in cases of feminicide. The main factors for that is mainly social isolation, the high burden of the healthcare system, the restriction of public transportation, and the rising unemployment. And we didn't have some sort of network or public policies to address that in time. So it was a very catastrophic time and social-wise, especially for women. And then we say, okay, but what gender has to do with any of that? Because many people might think, okay, but it was a very specific bad manager that Brazil had at the time as the head of the executive. Or someone might say, okay, but the conditions were not that good. All countries suffered a bit, or the healthcare system couldn't handle that because it wasn't expected. But no, indeed, gender, the gender of the leaders at the time had a lot to do with countries' performance. And we used here a lot of evidence as to support our article. One that called our attention a lot was this one from Yari Franz and Yao Schome. They did this study in 2024. It was published in the European Journal of Political Research. And it's a very, very robust research where they realized this ordinary least square regression test, where they compare the leader's gender versus 3 outcome variables measuring health performance. The three outcomes health performance are these ones: new infection cases, new death cases, and excess mortality. And another question that we know that come up very fast is usually, okay, but what about other variables such as the GDP of the country, or how the healthcare system at the time was prepared? What about the state capacity? What about the vaccination? And this study managed to put all these other variables controlled. So they controlled the leader's attributes, which in this case was mainly age. They also put as control variables the demographic evaluation, which is population size and urbanization score. They also controlled countries' capabilities, such as GDP per capita, healthcare system score, and the state capacity. And also they controlled other countries, the country's responsive measures that are like policies stringency, such as the lockdown, public transportation, the prohibition of gathering, and the vaccination. This is all to prove to try to isolate the correlation of the gender and the performance. And the results that we have here is very clear that women-led countries performed significantly better than male-led countries. And here you see, for example, the comparison between the first, second, third, and fourth wave. And in the cases of new infections, here we have all in all, it was minus 58. In the case of new death cases, full, it was minus 9.1, almost 9. Yes, and in minus 1, and excess mortality, also women performed much better than male-led countries. So of course, like what is the aspect of gender that caused this outperformance? And then these two authors, they decided to test two theoretical mechanisms. One was trust, and the other was efficacy. One, the trust they could measure through this survey. That is a survey on satisfaction and government support during the first and the second waves of COVID. This is a bit restricted because it was a survey that was ran mainly on EU countries. And they also ran this research on interaction between leaders' gender, health system, and state capacity. And the results are quite interesting. It kind of, well, sustain quite well the hypothesis of higher trust and higher efficacy in women's led countries. So here is the graphs for government support. They show that like in the first and the second wave, there was more trust from the population towards women leaders. This is the comparison between like women and male led countries and how much the government support is scored. We see that is significantly higher for women-led country, and also policy satisfaction here in the second wave of COVID, it went up to 22% higher than men-led countries, which is quite significant. Which you see that is kind of like a gain of trust, and it also showed the effectiveness of the policies that were implemented. Towards effectiveness, they analyzed the interaction between leaders' gender, health system score, and state capacity. And they compare to male-led countries. And every additional 1 unit in the health system of female-led countries, it reduced an additional 36.5 daily infection cases. It's a lot. And also 2.3% excess mortality. So this is quite significant as well, and it shows kind of a good efficacy in the measures that were adopted at the time. Also to sustain another evidence that we use that has a lot to do with this approach of women are better leaders during crisis is this study by Harvard Business Review, where they did this analysis of this 360-degree feedback data they collected in like 3-4 months. And their scores were like towards in the first wave of the pandemic. It was like pre-pandemic and and during the pandemic. And the scores of women, they scored much higher, much better. The approval here, you see, went like from 52% up to 57%, while men, they just increased like 2%. And women were significantly better performers, and it was acknowledged by those that were led by them. And why? What are the aspects of women leadership that makes it more effective, that rise trust? And we were talking while we were writing this article, and we were thinking, okay, but how does it connect, right? And they did also Harvard Business Review. They have this other study that they tested like some competencies and how men and women are rated. And they saw that women were rated more positively in 13 out of the 19 competencies that were assessed. And the respondents also placed great importance on interpersonal skills, such as inspire and motivates, communicates powerfully, collaboration and teamwork, etc. And in all of these competencies, women performed better. Also in other competencies such as initiative, learning agility, inspiration and motivation, developing others, and other competencies, as you can see in this graph. So I think this all in all come up together to prove this point. And here is like a photo of some of these women who made a lot of difference in the world, especially in their countries, where they could lead a much smoother crisis in their country. And we put here some lines that they said. One that I really like is from Erna Solberg, the Prime Minister of Norway. And she says something very interesting, that is, we must invest in the green transition. We must invest in people, women and girls in particular. And we must fulfill the promise of the SDGs to leave no one behind. And I think that's a great lesson. In Brazil, just to reinforce what Emily said, our hypothetical scenario was all based in real scenarios that happened in other countries, not in Brazil particularly, but that happened in these other countries that are here. We also use a lot of reference from Taiwan. Even Bangladesh performed really well, because many people think, okay, but we're talking about rich countries, right? And how comparable is that? But also countries as Bangladesh, for example, they outperformed compared to other countries. And they were also led by women during the crisis. And in Brazil, we had also great source of inspiration. And these are our heroines. They are figures that managed to make a difference during the crisis. One very interesting figure here is Estela Souza. She's the president of this council that unites the health secretariats from states in Bahia. And she conducted the articulations, which were very successful for having a very centralized and very cohesive answer to the pandemic. The state performed really well, and the state had a lot of influence from women in the leadership. We also have women influencing in many other aspects. For example, Jacqueline Goss, she coordinated the sequencing of the genome of coronavirus, and it was made in 2 days, while in the rest of the world, they were taking around 1 week. And it also made a lot of difference because we could see which strain was predominant at the moment and how to deal with it. Anyways, we have many great examples of women that had a great contribution. And we finish here. We decided to finish with this message that is, we cannot change the past. Like the hypothetical history that we created there, we wish it was what happened. Unfortunately, it wasn't. But we still can change the future. And we should use this data, this information to rethink about our choices. So that's it.
Well, thank you very much, Isabella and Lina, for your nice presentation. There was a very nice plot shift during your presentation, which enhanced very much the heart of it. So thank you so much. Let's hear from the other part. I believe it's Dr. Alfredo Beren that will address us primarily about solar storms and social unrest, year 2013, an investigation into cosmic influences on social movements. Am I correct, Dr. Alfredo Beren?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for putting me here on the screen. In first place, I want to thank the organizers, the Instituto de Justiça e Gênero da Universidade de Vigo and the Casa Comum of the Universidade do Porto. And of course, the people that run this place, because without them, we would have nothing. So thank you very much, Andre, for moderating this session. Yes, we are a group of Brazilians, just by chance, but perhaps because we are friendlier and we know each other, And this is the subject that we want to bring up to you. Fernando has the background on astronomy, but today he is a PhD in business. Carolina has over 10 years of research on the issues that we want to talk about, and she works at Harvard. Rodolfo Olivo is not with us today because he's teaching, and he's got a PhD in finance and works for the same institution that I work in Brazil, FIA Business School. Caizo is a prominent statistician in Brazil. He led the School of Statistics of the National School of Statistics. And myself here that I'm with you. I'm especially the guy who's presenting this, but I didn't do all the work. Now, what brought us together, and I think it's important to stress, is that we believe that we are not alone in the universe. Not only that we are not alone, but essentially we are a species that has grown to believe that we are cut off from the rest of the species alive on the world. And it's not true. What we want to understand is what makes us a part of a larger system of living beings on the earth. Because there is a well-known paradox of Fermi, who once asked, where is everybody? Because if the rest of the universe were populated, we should have seen something about this, but we haven't. So this is the kind of the paradox. And what we want to figure out is, how is it that the sun of this, our small solar system, impacts our lives? Because these revolutions are significant. When we learned that the Earth was not the center of the solar system, this enabled a fantastic scientific revolution. But we still were connected to one thing, which was believing that we had the power. And particularly, and bowing to our colleagues here who presented this very nice work on coronavirus in Brazil, we think that really man was created by God and not women. And this is what is actually expressed in the Sistine Chapel, for example, God giving the creation to Adam. Now, if we change this perspective, if we actually believe that we are here, shaped by the sun and not guiding the rest of the world, this is what we have to think about. We have to think that historically, on the subject that we are presenting today, social unrest correlates with solar activity. Now, this is crucial to acknowledge, because we have the same with homicide rates. So in some way, the aggressiveness that we have is highly correlated with the solar activity. And of course, the environmental factors and social factors have a role in that aggressiveness, but they are not alone. The geomagnetic disturbances that emanate from the sun in the interaction with the Earth can act as a trigger for social tensions. So what we will be discussing now is that we have a puzzle to solve. What happened in the year 2013? Because at the beginning of that year, everything was running well for Brazil. People were optimistic, not only about the social aspect, but also about the economy. But 6 months later, over 1 million people took to the streets to protest against the government, and quite violently. And nobody saw it coming. Now, why not? Because people were not used to looking to what we consider are important signs that trigger unrest, social unrest, and that is the sun. Now, let's put this a bit of context. And here is when our colleague Fernando takes over. So I pass over the work to Fernando to explain the origin of the universe, our sun, and how it interacts with the Earth.
Dr. Fernando, please help us on this issue. Hello? Dr. Fernando, please open your microphone.
Okay, thank you, Alfredo.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Let's continue the presentation from where Alfredo stopped. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here as a part of this fascinating conversation. Let's take a step back and begin with something that is simple and yet profound. The sun is a star, star like others, as we see in the night sky every night, every clear night. And we are close enough to the sun to see the sun as we see it. And as many stars, it is a kind of cosmic oven. It spends most of its life converting hydrogen into helium through nuclear fusion at its core. In the far future, our sun will expand into a so-called red giant star. It will take around 4 billion years to get there, and it starts to produce heavier chemical elements. And finally, eventually, it will shed its outer layers and become a beautiful planetary nebula, and leave behind inside the interior white dwarf kind of star. This process, the star evolution, is what creates chemical elements, the ones we see in the periodic table. Even the heavier, they are a result of the final stage of stellar evolution. So in that sense, the link between the stars, the sun, and ourselves is quite literal. As Carl Sagan said many years ago, we are made of star stuff. So the sun is not just a source of light. It's part of a cosmic lineage of stars that shaped the atoms that make up our bodies and everything around us. So to understand the sun activity, we need to look inside it. The sun is composed of several layers. The core, where nuclear fusion happens, the radiative zone, and the convective zone. It's important because there are lots of hot plasma in motion. It moves and circulates. And above that, we have the photosphere, the chromosphere, and corona. These outer layers are where we start to see the effects of the magnetic activity from the sun. The sun's magnetic field arises from the kind of dynamo effect as a result of the movement of the charged plasma in the convective zone, combined with the differential rotation. That is, the equator rotates faster than the poles, and this, along with internal flows, twists and amplifies the magnetic field in the sun. So there's a feedback loop at play. We astronomers study sun-like stars because it takes billions of years to see all the process. So we need to take pictures from different stars, sun-like stars, in different moments to get insights. And we know that the rotation of the stars affected the magnetic field, which in turn affect the solar wind or the stellar wind, that the stream of charged particles flowing into space from the star into space. Over time, the outflow of material, the so-called solar wind or stellar wind, carries away mass, and it affects the rotation, and the rotation affects the internal flows and the magnetic field and so on. It takes billions of years. But now, the current moment, as we see the sun during the years over a century, one of the clearest manifestations of this magnetic behavior is the solar cycle. We have well documented the 11-year cycle of sunspots activity. We can see in a diagram like that, so-called butterfly diagram, as you can see from the aspect of the picture, where we can see that sunspots along the time In the middle of the diagram, we see the solar equator and higher latitudes in the extremes. So we can see every 11 years we have intense activity of the sunspots. This is the so-called Schwabe cycle. Every 11 years, the sun magnetic field flips polarity. The south becomes north and vice versa. And so a full magnetic cycle takes 2 Schwabe cycles and so-called Hale cycles. It takes 22 years. So let's see some key relevant facts about these geomagnetic storms. During the solar maximum, we see more sunspots. And the sunspots are regions of intense magnetic activity in the sun. Which are often the source of solar flares that expand of the disposal of material into space, and coronal mass ejections, or so-called CMEs. So we have more flares, what can affect high-frequency radio communication on Earth, and also navigation system, for instance, GPS. These events can send huge bursts of plasma, of magnetic field toward Earth. We also have the so-called high-speed solar wind streams, which emerge from coronal holes and can stir up geomagnetic activity when they interact with the slower wind ahead. So, but and what can be after that? One of the most beautiful and visible consequence of solar activity is so-called aurora borealis, or northern or southern lights, which are increased during these peaks of solar activity. I had the opportunity to witness the northern lights in Tromsø, Norway, back in 2013. That's a small picture of my wife and I. It was right at the peak of solar cycle. And I can tell you, it's both a scientific and emotional experience. I strongly recommend for anyone who can go to north parts of the planet, or even the southern part. But it's much more difficult in the Antarctic region to get to see the northern lights or the southern lights. So I'm almost at the end of my part. To quantify this geomagnetic activity, we use the so-called KP index. It comes from German. It's planetarisch Kennziffer. It means planetary index. It's a scale that ranges from 0 to 9, and it's a quasi-logarithm scale, and it's measured each 3 hours in 3-hour intervals based on the data from magnetometers and data around the world. And it's an analog for the Richter scale for earthquakes, and it can be the geomagnetic activity can be measured by this index. And so, like a Richter scale, moving from 5 kp5 to 6 indicates a huge increase, or a significant increase in geomagnetic impact. So finally, what's the moral of the story? These geomagnetic disturbances have well-documented impacts on Earth. They can affect satellite operations, disrupt radio transmissions, or GPS, and so on. What we are now beginning to explore is whether such solar and geomagnetic activity could also have subtle influences on human behavior, or even in social phenomena. This is, of course, speculative and still under investigation, of course, but we are starting here this work to explore further I will now pass the word to my colleague Carolina, who will share some insights on potential links between solar activity and human health. Carolina?
Good. While Carolina gets ready to go, let me...
Hello. Yes.
Thank you very much, Fernando, because it's been a fascinating presentation. What we have is the sun, unstable. It has cycles, and we know that it has cycles because we've been looking at them for about 300 years, documenting the number of solar sunspots. And around those sunspots, there are flares and there are coronal mass ejections that interfere with the magnetosphere of the Earth. And this is what provokes the instability of the geomagnetic disturbances on the Earth. And this is what Carolina has studied on its impact on health for the last at least 10 years from Harvard University. So Carolina, get on with it. Thank you very much, Fernando.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the introduction, Alfredo, and thank you for the presentation, Fernando. So now I'm going to present, I can share from here.
I don't think we can see your, now it's coming up.
Yes.
Good.
So over the past, I would say I've lived here doing this research since 2015. I brought this study for Harvard School of Public Health, and we are investigating the impact of extraterrestrial and terrestrial radiation on human health and the interaction with other exposures such as air pollution. But I've studied this for at least 15 years. And originally, I won't say my background, but over these years, we have published a lot of papers, including different health outcomes, cardiovascular outcomes, neurological outcomes in genetics too, showing that the sun, in fact, controls our life and life expectancy much more than we know. Ancient populations knew about that, but over time, humans, we forget things and we repeat what they knew, and maybe I wouldn't say we research better, but we create a systematic research on this. We have many publications on this subject, including also in hypertension, pregnancy, adverse pregnancy outcomes, and others, melatonin and others. So the impact related to the health, the impact of solar activity on human health can happen in different, we hypothesize that can happen in two main ways. First, through the dysregulation of the 24 circadian rhythm. The 24 circadian rhythm is the rhythm that our physiology follows, 12 hours of light, 12 hours of darkness. During this 12 hours light, 12 hour darkness, our body produces different kinds of hormones, and it also have different patterns of a physiological response. During the night, when we have the production of melatonin, melatonin is produced usually with there is no light exposure. If we have any kinds of light exposure, melatonin will be affected. And what happens is with the dysregulation of the 24-hour circadian rhythm, melatonin secretion is affected, is reduced, and causing different impact on human health, because melatonin is an antioxidant hormone that reduce adverse impact of oxidative stress producing during the day. So, and also helps us to sleep better secondarily, but primarily it helps us to regulate, to reduce the adverse impact of oxidative stress. So it helps us to keep our heart, other systems healthier. But because of the intense solar activity, melatonin levels reduce, and we are more susceptible to have adverse health outcomes, as we saw in briefly just the title of the publications that I showed you in the previous slide. Also, besides that, there are many mechanisms related to the disruption of the circadian rhythm. Also, we have the dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system regulates heart rate, blood pressure. It controls the adrenaline, the adrenaline in our body, and can impact the way we show our emotions, even unconsciously, because this process is not related to what we think, is only related to how our body responds to light. And if we have an increase of solar activity and geomagnetic activity, because of that, we will have here, there are some adverse health outcomes that we've investigated, but related to the social crisis and violence related to the solar activity, we see that this is the image that is now one of our papers that is under review. And I draft this hypothesis, how solar activity could impact our emotions. So, and what happened is when we receive the intense solar radiation and geomagnetic activity through our eyes, not only through our eyes, through our body, we have also light sensor all over our body. We dysregulate the function of the hypothalamus, that is the center of the 24 circadian rhythm. And it affects the pineal gland that produces melatonin, it affects the adrenal gland that produces cortisol, and affect the autonomic nervous system that regulates the parasympathetic and sympathetic nerves, which regulates, for example, heart rate. And if we have an increase of the heart function, we even unconsciously, we don't feel well. So we have the sensation that something is happening, some danger is happening. And so we tend to think what is happening. And then we formulate our hypothesis to justify our emotions, and it creates a circuit that makes us feel anxious and also generates more aggressivity in our behavior. Also, this pattern affects the amygdala, that is a center of emotions, and it makes and trigger social violence related to solar activity. So, and now this is my presentation, and I pass to Alfredo to continue our presentation. Thank you so much.
Brilliant, Carolina. Thank you very, very much. So, for the rest of the people that are watching us, we have in one place. Can you put me on the screen, please, so that I can? Oh, there we are. But I think that I need to be put on show.
Sorry.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Here I am. Now, just to put you back into the picture, Fernando gave us an idea of the solar system and of how the cycle of the sun, measured through the number of sunspots, increases to a maximum and then decreases every 11 years. Around those sunspots, we have ejections of material, ionized material, magnetized material that interferes with the magnetosphere of the Earth. Carolina has brought us the impact that has on health, on various dimensions, sustained through 15 years of publications. Now, what I'm going to focus on now is on social aggression, unrest, because the same thing that interferes with an individual's behavior interferes with a collection of people. So this is what I am going to address now. There have been historical precedents of sunspots affecting human life socially. And one of the first, certainly there were others, but we don't have time for that. But there was a Russian scientist who realized that during the period of sun's activity and solar ejections and sunspots and the rest, at war during the First World War, people would wane and increase their aggressiveness. So puzzled by this, he went back to study archaeology of all the disciplines and came up with his doctorate on the periodicity of world historic processes. Now, a colleague of ours that we have written a book with, Gorbanov, he came up with this fascinating graph in which you have those cycles that Fernando was addressing, those cycles that go up and down in orange here in the picture, represent the cycles of the sun across time, from the year 1900 to the year 2000. Now, he has pictured of important social unrest across the world, whether it was the Russian Revolution, the revolution in Spain, or many other places. So in a way, what Chizhevsky was doing and our colleague Gorbanov is showing in this illustration is that, yes, there is social unrest associated to sunspots and the geomagnetic disturbances that can explain. So I went to study something that was quite interesting, because in the year 1830 in Britain, there were many riots in the hinterland, peasant riots. And what fascinated the people that were studying was that the propagation of those riots. How was it that they transmitted from one geographical area to the next? Was it because there was a marketing session, you know, the fairs, and the people would go to the fairs, speak to each other and say, oh, look what they are doing, let's do the same here. No, that wasn't the reason. Was it that there was newspapers, like today social media would irradiate behavior? No, because the newspapers were very expensive and they were not read by the peasants, which were mostly illiterate. But what happened was that they did not look into the stars to understand that perhaps that rioting behavior was triggered in that region of the world for something that was happening above their heads. And if we look at this graph that I'm showing to you now, it's a complex graph, but let me explain. You have the number of sunspots that increase and decrease over time. But there is one period between two peaks of sunspots in which lasted only 3 or 4 weeks. But the amount of riots that was happening increased 13 times, and then it went back to normal. So this is not something that you can ignore, because what happens is that the explanation for that riots, which was social, which was political, and it's economical, and it's interesting, was not really looking to the fact that perhaps what was triggering that behavior was something that was above the heads. Now, we have something similar happening in Britain in the year 2003. That is the rate of murders in England and Wales during a period of 50 years. It went very steeply up, reached a peak, and came down again. Now, the British people are still trying to figure out how that happened. And if you look at the geomagnetic disturbances, these 3 peaks that you have here, these are geared by the sunspots, sun cycles. And so the geomagnetic disturbances were increasing, they decreased as the murder rate did, and they peaked in 2003, and then they declined steeply again. So we have another case in which social unrest, measured by the number of murders, increased and decreased with geomagnetic disturbances. And it's not only in England. All this happened also in Canada and in the US. Look at that graph there, please. It's not that difficult. But what you have is the rescaled American homicide rate. I rescaled it because it was too large to put all in the same graph. But what you can see in those blue and orange rates is that the murder rates across almost 60 years go up and down in these neighboring countries almost simultaneously, with a correlation of almost 90%. We went further and we analyzed a curve that goes through the sunspot cycles, and that is the dark blue curve. Now, you may have remembered from Fernando's presentation that the sun has cycles. And when he was watching those beautiful aurora borealis with his wife in 2013, he also pointed to a graph that suggested that you had cycles in the sun. Now, what we have known for over 100 years is that those cycles are not random. They usually come in 2s and 3s. That is, one cycle is increased and the next one is higher and the next one is higher still, and then they begin to decrease. And this enveloping curve in dark blue is suggesting that it had an impact on the evolution of murder rates in the US and in Canada, which varied in tandem with a correlation of 89%. Now, all this may have been triggered by the synchronicity of geomagnetic disturbances, despite the great difference that we have in the US and Canada. So coming back to what interests us in Brazil. This graph here is the graph of, during the year 2013, the geomagnetic disturbances affecting all the world, but we are interested in Brazil. So what do we have here? Look, please, at this particular region in June of 2013. You can see not only that the amplitude of the geomagnetic disturbances was large, but also it was very frequent. So if we follow what Carolina was saying, that the human organism reacts to geomagnetic disturbances, it must react to both the intensity, the amplitude of the disturbance, and also to the frequency. Because if it's too frequent, we cannot react rationally, positively. We have a sense of disturbance. And this is what makes us into unease. And so if we go to the month of June in 2013 in more detail, we see that it was a wake-up for Brazil. Here we have the heightened KP index that Fernando was speaking about. The highest that is recorded is 9, but at the beginning of the month we had 7, and then it went down and it went up again to almost 6. And when we had the disturbances in São Paulo and in the rest of Brazil, we had very significant oscillations of the KP address. So what we did is, so we can't measure riots by day, but we had to study on the newspapers, when did they happen? How large were they? So we had to select. On the one side, we have a very detailed day by day, even 3 times by day, of the KP index. And on the social side, we have newspapers to tell us when the people rioted. So we narrowed this down to weeks, so we can match geomagnetic disturbances to the riots. So I'm going to try to increase this for you so that you can see it better. At the beginning of June, we had riots in Sweden. And remember, the height here is a quadratic index. And there were riots in Turkey on the 15th of May, around that week. And those riots were intensifying a week later. But they began in Brazil when we had the largest variation of the quadratic index that we are measuring. They began on the week of the 29th of May to the 4th of June. And they continued. Then there was a lull, and then they increased again when the amplitude was larger. And they peaked towards the end of the month. So if you go back to your memories of Brazil 2013, the explanation for those riots could be attributed to the fact that there was a large amplitude of geomagnetic disturbances, but also a very frequent one. Now, I don't want to, I'm here too large on the screen, we don't need it. So I don't want to pester you with all these details of what happened. But what is interesting is that there is, if not a historical repetition of the peasant revolts of 1830 in Britain, of the murders in Britain, the murders in Canada and the US, but also the riots that happened in Brazil. Because what we see is that there is an oscillation that coincides with the rioting timeline. As Carolina was explaining, the human organism responds to external impacts and perhaps also to their size and frequency. We have shown that there were global patterns in many different countries, similar protest movements across time and space, both the peasant riots of the 1830s, the British murder peaks of 2003, the US and Canadian homicide rates with 90% correlation across 60 years, the unrest in Sweden, Brazil, Bulgaria, Bangladesh, Turkey, China, Ukraine, and Singapore. And the common factor was, one, latent grievances. You have to have grievances. The geomagnetic disturbances only acts as a trigger. And just before we finish, we have to look into what happened in Ukraine that year. You may remember that there were very strong riots that ushered a president out. That president was favorable to Russia. They got him out. The next year, the Russians invaded Crimea in response to that ousting. And since then, we have been with the Ukrainian and Russian war in that region of the world. And it all began at this period in the year 2013, which I'm going to show you now in greater detail.
Dr. Alfredo, please conclude.
Sorry, I have to finish?
Yes, as you may.
Okay, I'm closing up. Just let me just usher this again so that we don't do too much of it. Oops, sorry. Can I go back? I hadn't finished.
Yes, you may go back. Sure, of course.
Oh, okay, good. So what have we suggested? That we have historical data from multiple sources and weekly analysis of geomagnetic disturbances, oscillations of those geomagnetic disturbances generated by the sun in major protests that were consistent across geographies and cultures. And this is when the perspective changed. If you know that the sun may have an impact, then you're no longer the human agent that you thought you were since the Michelangelo drew the Sistine Chapel, the creation of Adam. So geomagnetic disturbances might matter. What we need to do in the future is examine these effects in social and political systems, which are different, develop predictive models. At present, we only have 3-day predictive models, and explore the ethical implications of using the knowledge on solar activity for social management and control. So I've done this work with my illustrious colleagues. I'm just presenting this latter part of it. Thank you very, very much for your attention, and thank you very much for the organizers, and particularly to you, André Coelho, for allowing us to show our work.
What such an impressive two papers we have had now. Emily and Isabella, would you consider that women should be in power when the next solar activity occurs in the future?
That's a fantastic crossing out the two topics. I mean, it would be definitely a game changer in dealing with the new crisis, no?
Well, you know, in Portugal, I have to share with you that we have been managed during the COVID period by 2 women. And I believe as a citizen that we did very well. Unfortunately, we had some fatalities, but we did well. Alfredo and your team, is it possible that your predictions may help Emily and Isabella's studies in the future? Can you say that when the next solar activity will occur, so that we can defend ourselves, and it being in a period of crisis, women deal with the situation in a more effective manner?
Yes, no, but with the amount of knowledge that we have today, no, we can't predict. We know with barely 3 days ahead of time when we're going to have a major geomagnetic disturbance.
Emily, is that enough for you? 3 days.
Well, first of all, I was looking for where I raised my hand. I'd like to say that we are all here, right? It's not only me and Isabella, but also Raquel is here, so is Sarah, and so is Livia, and right? So we are all here, and we can all answer. But 3 days, what for? For solving the problems of a COVID breakthrough.
Of human crisis.
No,
I think we can do it. Yes.
no, I think that in 3 days you can't do much. But what happens is once you realize that geomagnetic disturbances may have an impact, you get prepared beforehand. So you're not completely out in the dark. What you need, what we have at present is only 3 days, right? But 3 days are not that little. You can tell, for example, in terms of rioting, that the police should act with restraint, which didn't happen in the riots of June of 2013. They went there and they started clubbing people up and down, and that was irradiated in the social media, and everybody got angry against the government of São Paulo and then other cities, and it hit Dilma, the president, very hard. I mean, we had a woman president at the time, right? It was not her fault. What could have been her fault? She delayed the increase of the bus tickets, which usually happened in December, but she delayed it until June. And when the news came up, the people were ready to protest. Because if you increase the bus rates in December, people are on the beach, disorganized, they can't protest. But if you do it in the middle of winter, you can be sure that people will protest.
That's very interesting that the way Dilma delayed that the increase of price tickets. Do you think is that this kind of interpersonal skills that women have, as this one that Alfredo is mentioning, that your paper focus on this kind of sensibility that prevails more in women?
Women are better at that for sure.
Just to now in 2024, 2025, we are in the peak of solar activity. So that's why we are seeing more and more movements, social movements.
I agree. For the last 40 years, the geomagnetic disturbances were decreasing in intensity. Murder rates declined, which was good. But people thought it was because we were more civilized, because there were more police in the streets. And really what had happened is that the geomagnetic disturbances had decreased year to year for about 40 years. Now, as Carolina is pointing out, we are entering into a different phase. This is the first solar cycle that has a higher degree of sunspots, geomagnetic disturbances, and perhaps it is the first of the next 3 or 4 solar cycles that will become increasingly more significant. Now, if we are right, then we're going to have more murders and more riots, perhaps even more wars.
Alfredo, let's hear from Livia. Thank you, Alfredo. Let's hear from Livia. Livia, please.
Thank you, Andre. I was thinking about, because it's important to highlight that we have once again been going through a cycle of increased violence, racism, xenophobia, and anti-science movements. And of course, we are talking about complex problems, wicked problems. So it's very important to see through different lenses. So maybe when we talk about the gender equality and the importance of that, about building more diverse and inclusive spaces, it's very much connected with what we are talking about, right? Because when we put lenses only in one matter or subject, we will end up having more probability to make mistakes and to not view all the complex aspects that we are talking about. So I think it's important to highlight that in our discussion.
Thank you. Isabella, can you say to us, can you resume this interpersonal skills that your research has been highlighting for us, please?
So let me check here just quickly. But the competencies, right? And then they highlight. Am I on mute or have I unmuted myself? Oh, okay,
No,
I have already.
you're
Sorry.
okay. You're okay. You're wonderful. Yep.
Cool. Here they are.
So we can, so men can better, you know, evolve.
They talk about like some interpersonal skills that are inspire and motivating others, communicating powerfully, collaboration and teamwork, and relationship building. These are some of the interpersonal skills that the respondents of this research, this analysis that was a 360 degrees review that they did during a pandemic. And the respondents placed them as like a really like the greater importance competencies in a leader. And in these competencies also is the competencies where women performed much better than their male peers. And they made in the research, it was by Harvard Business Review, then they made this comparison and saw, okay, the scores are significantly higher for women. So we were wondering, okay, which aspects that make a difference, you know, like in the leadership, that in the end might impact these aspects of trust and effectiveness while they manage a crisis, right? That end up bringing these outcomes that are quite superior that were analyzed, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah. So I think it should be fair to believe that if in case women had more power functions in the world, I think we would be living in a better place.
Well, that's our hypothesis. What do you think, Alfredo?
Let me remind you one. I mean, I'm older than all of you are. I can see it by your faces. But do you remember Margaret Thatcher?
Yes.
The Iron Lady?
Yeah.
I mean, she was I mean, an extraordinary prime minister for Britain, but she was not kind. She was not emphatic. She had nothing of those qualities that we like to see in women. So I think that what we should be looking for is to develop kindness, empathy, solidarity, and see ways in which we can train women and men to be more solidarious, kinder, able to forgive, and see how we can promote them to positions of leadership with those qualities, rather than promoting people that are aggressive, like Margaret Thatcher was. She led a war against Argentina. She sunk the Belgrano ship when it was not necessary. I mean, watch out. She was a woman in power, right? So rather than looking after promoting women because they're women, though I agree with you, there are qualities in women that men do not have in the same proportion and are desirable, and that perhaps by simply promoting women, we will get a better world. But mind you, I'm not sure. This is something that we have to take into account, because Margaret Thatcher was not Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand.
As an ending question, what do you both understand? Why is the reason that the world we're living in still is very male founded, male based? So a lot of men everywhere are in power, and the world is as it is. Do you think, is there a correlation? What do you think, ladies and men?
It's an important question, but I don't want to take too much of your time. I would rather hear. I have an opinion, but I would like to hear other people as well.
Thank you.
Anyone wants to answer? I would just like to add a little bit on the characteristics, for example, of Thatcher. And in the article, we approach a little bit of that because there is a lot of what happens towards the masculinization of positions of power, which has to do with, like, it doesn't matter necessarily if it's a man or women, but they get these traditional features of being rough, of being, you know, like exactly these characteristics that you quoted, and they are traditionally associated with the masculine being, right? And then many times, like, women embrace it because that's how positions of power happen, right? Like, for you to thrive in these positions, usually you gotta carry on with these features, and that's how you thrive, right? Like, because these environments are kind of already impregnated, and that's how you get your respect. And very often when you have the possibility of bringing your features that like are not historically associated with the masculine power, then it's different. Go on, Livia.
Livia, please.
I would like to add on because are you listening to me? I'm sorry because I have a climate crisis right over during our session, but I would like to add that, of course, we do have some social learnings. So when we are born, we are going to expect some patterns, female patterns and male patterns. Of course, this will be related to all kinds of aspects, but one of them is like what we learn about being a woman. So, of course, we do have a tendency to learn more about care, we also have the expectation that we will have to care more. Of course, we do know that at work balance, we work more than 10 hours by week than men with this care work. So it's important to highlight that. Of course, we will have these skills in general, more, how can I say that? Help me, girls. But we are going to be better in that also because of this social learning. So it's a matter of prejudice, of course, because we are going to have a tendency to look to women and expect that she will be good at that. But of course, at the same time, we will learn more about that because that's how we are learning about being a woman. It's complex, but I think I could be clear. I don't know if it helped.
Can I mention something about Isabella right now that mentioned something which was important, is the masculinization of the attitude that leads people to power. I think she's got a point there, particularly when the women are selected by men, right? This is something which is important. It's not just a question of women in power, it's who put them there in power, for what reason. And do those women selected by men have the qualities that we attribute to women in excellence? Like, for example, care, as Livia was saying, capacity to listen to others. For example, those were not qualities that Dilma had. Dilma was not a politician by nature. She was driven to the position of president of Brazil, but she didn't like politicians. She didn't like to speak to them. She didn't like to listen to them. Eventually, she was ousted. But what we have to have in mind is that not all women are the nice, caring, emphatic, and good at interpersonal skills. They are more prominent amongst women, but not in all women. Now, trying to answer to André Coelho's question there, why are there so many men in power? I mean, it's an important question, André, and there would be no purpose of us being together if we didn't try to answer the big questions, right? I mean, why is it that this is still a man's world? Now, I'll take you to something which might be a digression, but perhaps it's not. We all know the shape of an egg. We know chicken, and we know the shape of an egg. But birds that fly have elongated eggs because they have to go through a narrower duct in order to get out to the world. So the fact that if they fly makes their eggs more elongated. Now bring this to the human being. In order to run and chase after animals, it had to be in two legs. And this requires a narrow hip. Now, women with narrow hips had greater difficulty in giving children because they died in childbirth, because the human size of the skull is too large to go through the very narrow vagina.
Sorry, Alfredo, please, I would like to hear Emily. I think she's had the
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, Livia. Emil, thank you.
Sorry, and so can I continue? So perhaps what happened was that women with narrow hips died more in childbirth. They became less frequent in the cauldron of genetic size, and women with big hips were better at childbirth, but had to take care of the children, and perhaps that's why they stayed more at home, and the women and the men became the aggressive ones that hunted the animals. And still today, when there is no reason for them to hunt animals, nor to be able to run, we have more men in capacity of war and in chasing after objectives.
Thank you, Alfredo. Emil, thank you.
First of all, about way back in the past of the conversation about the riots. The riots started, well, I live in Natal in Brazil, and the riots started here, yes, during the winter, which is really not cold here in Natal. So Revolta do Busão, which started all this, was in a city of where the temperature is of about 22 degrees Celsius during winter time. So it's not really like we're all at home because we're so cold. Well, sorry, we're all in the streets. We're not at the beach because we go to the beach kind of all year round. But yes, those were rainy days, which would have made us stay home. This we didn't. So just like, okay, the sun may influence us, but I agree with Livia. Maybe there's more. Maybe people were very tired of what was happening because it did start with the bus fares. And about the behavior of women when they're leaders and when they're chosen by men. Also, we didn't bring in the presentation because we had so many concepts from the work we developed here in the ministry, but the article will surely come with concepts like the glass ceiling, the concrete ceiling, the queen bee. Those are concepts that talk about why or why not women are chosen to be leaders. What happens once they're there? What happens amongst women once they're there? This masculinity traces and well, anyways, it's very complex, right? And I think, again, agreeing with what Livia said, maybe we should think, we can, of course, think about the sun as I started, as Alfredo said, right? If there's something going on and, well, anyways, and then there's something in the universe that may starts the thing right, we can think about it, but I think there's so much like I'm a researcher in the complexity field, and yes, I do think that there's a lot. We cannot think that's just like it's not just some beams, but again, it can be, but it adds up, right? The fact that there was a riot against a woman in a sexist country, I think sexism should be also a point there, right? And again, the Revolta do Busão started here in Natal, and we had a woman governor here. So yeah, it's now it's the only state in Brazil that has a woman as a governor. And well, I don't know. There's what I mean is there's a whole complexity.
Nice people.
We have other concepts that we will have to bring in the article because the presentation was not enough.
And Emily, when it comes to data, we see that companies that are that have more representative leaders and so more women, people tend to feel more satisfied with the work, and included the men have this perception. And we are talking about data and the best practices. So one example to highlight that in a better concrete way is when a woman is assertive, usually the people in the common sense will think she have the perception that she is aggressive. When it comes to men, for example, in general, if he is assertive, he will bring a perception of confident and competent. So of course, there are so many layers that we are going to talk a little bit here, but of course this will always discomfort, because we have to change these perspectives in order to
I believe we're missing Livia.
Yeah, she's having electricity problems, I guess, because of.
Well, but we really need in the name of Historia Periodica and the What If conference, it would be a great joy to join you again in the next time. What such interesting motives from both parts. Women, son of lights, getting rid of the crisis, living in peace. Thank you for both parts. Thank you all. What intense presentations. We did not. This is what alternative history is all about: questioning the past, questioning the present, trying to achieve a new future, new possibilities. Thank you so much for your genius minds. Please keep on going, trying to improve our world in a better place. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you very much, André.
So
it was
much.
fantastic. Thank you very much
you.
for the debate, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye-bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.